right, church, how are we doing this morning? Everybody good? Awesome, cool. Hey, I see a lot of new faces, so let me kind of catch you guys up on where we're at and what we're doing. We are in the middle of a series that we are calling Faith That Works. And in this series, what we're really doing is we're just walking through the book of James. And for you guys that aren't familiar with James, James is the little brother of Jesus. He is a guy who's writing this letter. He actually becomes one of the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, and he's writing this letter that he coins to a group of Christians who have really kind of suffered through some immense persecution, and they're kind of scattered. And the thing that James knows, and the things that James realizes that, look, our faith, our salvation is a personal thing. He understands that our faith is a vertical relationship that we have with Jesus Christ, right? That our faith is based on a vertical relationship. But he also understands that our faith is lived out horizontally. That we live out our faith in the relationships that we have with the people around us, the people in our community, the people in our neighborhoods, our families, our friends, our workplaces. He understands that. And so what he's doing in this letter is he's trying to give the readers a very practical faith. He wants them to build this faith that doesn't just work on Sunday mornings, but it actually works Monday through Saturday as well. And so he helps us, he gives us some guidance and some things to think about when it comes to how we live out our faith in very, very practical ways. And so the one thing, if you have been with us, the one thing that I hope you have picked up on with this entire series is just the way the whole series is kind of interconnected. Like when you read this letter, all of the things that he's talking about are just kind of interwoven together. The book of James, it's actually not even a book, it's a letter. It's a letter that he writes. And for us, sometimes I think when we look at this 2,000 years later, what we do is we kind of compartmentalize and we break it down into we're going to do this whole book in like 13 different sermons. And we do that mainly because there's none of you that would sit through a 9-hour sermon, right? I mean, there's a few of you guys who would. You guys are crazy and sick. You would like that. But we break it down into multiple sermon series, right? But that's not the way James wrote this. James put this letter together, and it flows together in this one letter. And so what you see is a lot of the themes that he talks about kind of fall back on themselves. They kind of build on themselves. In fact, I would love it if we could somehow take out the chapters and the verse numbers and just read it like a letter. You would see just how well this entire letter flows. And the reason I say that is because if you were with us last week, you know the thing that we talked about was wisdom. That there are two types of wisdom you can have. You can have what we call an earthly wisdom, which is kind of marked by bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. But then we have this thing called a godly wisdom, or what James calls a wisdom from above. And one of the markers of this wisdom from above is what we call peace. And this was a central theme that James talks about in his letter, and it's one of the things that he talked about last week. In fact, if you look at the last verse we looked at last week, which was James 3, verse 18, he says that when you sow peace, like when you plant peace in your life, the harvest is righteousness. So this idea of obtaining peace is a big deal. And I say that because the thing that we're going to look at today, the topic that we're going to look at, what James is trying to convey to us, the ultimate goal is peace. That he wants us to obtain the peace that we can have in Christ Jesus. Now, he's going to talk about it in the context of conflict. He's going to talk about it in the context of fighting and quarrels in our lives. But this is very much a continuation of what we saw last week, or what we discussed last week in the message. And so let me ask you this question, though. How many of you guys have ever experienced conflict with someone? How many have ever experienced fights and quarrels, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about like good old-fashioned, coming to blows like a physical fight, but I'm also not talking about a difference of opinion. That's not what I'm talking about. Like a good old-fashioned conflict, a struggle, a fight, right? Yeah, see, we all have. At some point in our lives, we all have experienced that, so you're all uniquely qualified for today's message to hear this. In fact, I would say this about myself. I feel like we're going to cover like 3 verses today. We're going to do James chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. I feel like I am personally uniquely qualified for this message. Like I've been training for this my entire life. Like if you look back on my life, at the things that I've done, like I am not one who has shied away from conflict. I'm not one who has backed down from a fight at all. In fact, when I was in the military, my bosses would tell me, Michael, you can't fall on every sword. You got to pick your battles. And I'm like, I pick the battles that come to my doorstep, and I fight those fights well. That's what I like to do. In fact, it wasn't even that I would wait for the fight to come to me and that. I actually would go out seeking conflict sometimes. If I went through a season where things were going too well, I would get this itch and I would go find some fights because that's just who I was. It was inside of me. Well, what James is going to do today, James is actually going to address that. He's going to address that in you when you find yourself in these types of conflicts. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to be, like I said, we're in James chapter 4. We're going to be starting in verse 1. And what James is going to do today is he's going to offer us up a logical question. That's how he's going to start today. He's going to give us a very logical question to kind of launch this. He says this in verse 1. He says, what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? And this is going to be the anchor question that's going to drive our discussion in our time today. What causes fights and what causes quarrels among you? In other words, what he's asking is, look, if God's wisdom produces peace, if God's wisdom is marked by peace, then why are there so many fights among Christians? And it's a valid question, right? Why do we find ourselves doing this all the time? Now, if I were to ask you this question, like if I gave each one of you an opportunity and said, hey, I want you to describe your last fight. I want you to describe your last conflict that you had with someone, right? Some of you, it's pretty fresh. It's like literally on the car ride here this morning. You had your fight then. For others, it might have been like through a text or through social media because nothing is super healthy like fighting over text, right? But if we were to do that and I gave you an opportunity to describe what would happen, my guess is we would all kind of start the same way. It'd be like, my boss did this. My kids didn't do this. He said this. She said that. See, we have this tendency when we talk about the source of our conflict of looking outward at other people. When we talk about our conflicts that we have, what we tend to do is we look externally for the causes of those fights. Like it's that person's fault. It's those set of circumstances. Like here I was minding my own business, just being this awesome guy sitting here and they walked in. And then he said this and she said that and they did this and they did that. And now all I find myself is just raging. Like I'm just mad. I'm just upset, right? Like some of you hear this and you're like, your blood pressure is already starting to boil just thinking about your last fight already. But the reality is we've all been there. Like how many of you have ever said, oh my, they just make me so mad. Like I'm just so mad at that person. Have you said that? We all have, right? I mean, we don't want to admit it, but we've all been there. We've all said those things. But here's the problem with that statement. It's just not true. It's not true because the reality is nobody can make you do anything. You understand that? Like nobody can make you do anything. In fact, Jesus says it this way. He says the only thing that will come out of you is what's inside of you. So no one is making you be mad. In fact, if you find yourself raging, that means rage is on the inside. If you find yourself being mad is what's on the inside. If you find yourself bubbling up with like hostility and hatred, that's what's on the inside. And if you find yourself using harmful and hurtful words in your fights with other people, that's what's on the inside, and that's what Jesus says. Now, don't get me wrong. I get it. Like, people can ruffle your feathers. People can kind of bump up against you and cause you to be frustrated and things like that. But the reality is, when the pressures of life begin to squeeze you, the only thing that will come out of you is what's inside of you. You guys get that, right? You understand what he's saying? See, he's going to keep going. He says, what causes quarrels and fights among you? And then he says this, is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? James is like, it's not your circumstances. It's not the personality differences of the people that are around you. It's not even that political party or that political party. It's not your boss. It's not those people. It's not none of that stuff. He says that what's actually causing the conflicts, the source of your conflicts, is you. It's inside of you. And you and I, we have this tendency to think that it's what's happening outside. That's what's happening over there. We say things like, look, if they would just straighten up, then I wouldn't have fights and quarrels. Man, if they would just act right, then I would have peace in my life. But what James is saying, no, it's not like that. He's saying, do you want to know what the common denominator in every conflict that you've ever been in? It's you. You are the common denominator of every fight that you've been in. Every fight, every conflict, you were there. And you were the problem. That's what he's saying. He's saying that you have these passions inside of you that are waging war. And this word passions, it's the same Greek word where we get the word hedonism, okay? It's this idea of self-centered delight, this self-centered pleasure, this sinful craving that we have. That's what he means by passions. It's this idea that I can do what I want. I can do what I want with who I want. I can do what I want with who I want, when I want, and you're not the boss of me. You don't get to tell me what to do. You don't get to tell me who I am. You are not the boss of me. It's this whole mentality of you be you, boo. You just do you, and that's fine. That's what he's talking about with these passions. And what James is saying here is that we all have these self-centered cravings, these sinful cravings in us, and they're waging war. And the war that he's talking about is happening in our hearts. That's where these wars are taking place. In other words, what James is saying, his point here is that our greatest conflicts are not around us, they're within us. It's not happening externally. It's actually happening inside of us. See, what he's saying is that these external conflicts are actually just symptoms. And the disease is actually internal. That when we try to somehow come up with this solution for dealing with our conflicts, like if we find ourselves dealing with the external, we're only dealing with the symptoms. Like if your solution to conflict in your life is, well, we're just not going to talk about that topic because every time we talk about that topic, we get into a heated argument. So we're just not going to do that, right? Okay. Or you know what? Every time Bob and I have a conversation, it gets like this, and I'm just not going to talk to Bob anymore. You're treating the symptoms, you're not treating the disease. And so what James is going to do is he's going to help us figure out the disease which is inside of us this morning. So he keeps going. James is now going to unpack it. He says that the problem is these passions are waging war in your heart. And so now he's going to help us understand what that means when he says this war within. And the answer, he says, is actually really simple. Like it's not complicated. We have a tendency to overcomplicate things. He says it's actually not that complicated at all. Verse 2, he says this. He says, you desire and do not have. He's saying it's that simple. He says that the core of your conflicts, the core of my conflicts, the reason I fight, the reason you quarrel, is because you have something that you want and you're not getting it. That when you peel the onion back, all of your conflicts come down to that. In other words, he's saying that the war always begins inside of you with these desires, that you have certain desires. And these desires, just so you know, are kind of baked into our DNA. It's who we are. It's just part of our human nature. And look, I get it. Like the moment I say that all of your external conflicts actually begin with inside of you, I'm going to get some pushback. Like some of you right now are getting super defensive hearing me say that, right? You're like, Michael, you don't understand it. It's not that simple. It's not like that. It's like I have rights. Like I'm entitled to something and that person trampled all over my rights. Or you'll say, look, that thing was unjust and the only thing I really want is justice. I just want justice to be served. Or you say things like, well, I deserve that. Like they made a promise to me and they didn't keep their promise and I deserve to have the promises made kept to me. And so that person now owes me something. And you understand that's just semantics, right? Like you're saying the same thing just in a different way. Like when it comes down to it, you're saying the same thing. You're just saying it slightly differently. Like the reality is you want something that you think is rightfully yours and you're not getting it. That thing that you want is not coming to fruition. It's just a different way of saying the exact same thing. Now, what we don't say and what we don't want to acknowledge, the reason we don't do these things, the reason we don't say, hey, I have this desire for a certain outcome in my life, and that outcome is not being met, I'm not getting my way, the reason we don't do that is because, man, it makes us sound like a toddler. We start acting like a little toddler throwing a tantrum, you know what I'm saying? Like we put our fingers in our ears, we hold our breath, and we stomp our feet until we get our way. That's what the conflicts are about. And that's what James is telling us this morning. See, what you got to understand about this idea of desires. Desires, for the most part, are going to be selfish. Your desires are going to be self-centered. Your desires are going to be self-promoting for the most part. And this is the God of the culture that we are living in right now. See, culture just does nothing but reinforce this. Culture will tell you that you are the sun and that anything that comes into your orbit, now has to revolve around you. Like everything is all about you. And what you got to understand is your selfish desires, my selfish desires, if we leave them unchecked, what happens is they become idols. They become idols in our lives. Like they become the thing that you're going to worship over everything else. Like if you desire comfort more than anything else, that's going to become your idol, and you're going to worship comfort. And what's going to happen is, even when someone brings truth to you, if it makes you uncomfortable, you're going to discredit it, and you're going to push it off, because the one thing that you want is comfort. And comfort will take place above everything else. That's what happens with our selfish desires. Now, here's what you got to understand about desires. Not all desires are bad. Some desires that you have are legitimate desires. Like God has placed certain desires on your heart. He has created you with certain desires. Like I have a desire to be loved. That's a legitimate desire. Like I have a desire to belong. I have a desire for respect in my life. There's nothing wrong with that. There are legitimate desires that you have, but there's two problems with legitimate desires. The first problem is this: when our legitimate desires become demands. Like when you take a desire and you turn it into an expectation or an obligation for the people around you. See, the moment that a legitimate desire moves into the demand category, what you have done is you've created a conditions-based relationship that becomes performative. Like the only way you're getting anything out of this relationship is if you're getting what you want out of the relationship. See, when you love someone, or when your love for someone is based on conditions, the second that they stop meeting those conditions, you're going to be looking for a way out. Like if all of your desires are demands and it becomes condition-based, you're only going to be with that person as long as you're getting from them what you want. And look, we all have that friend, right? We all know that person. Super nice, super personable, really good person, as long as you're giving them what they want in the relationship. And the second you stop giving them what they want, man, they're going to blacklist you. They're going to ghost you. They're going to put up the Heisman. And you're no longer going to be their friend, because they're not getting from you the things they want, because they are condition-based. And here's the only thing I can say to that. Thank goodness God doesn't base our relationship with him on conditions. Like our relationship with God is unconditional. Because if it hadn't been that way, Jesus never would have went to the cross for us. If he would have waited for us to meet all the conditions and get him right, he never would have died for us on the cross. See, in condition-based relationships, there's no room for unconditional love. There's no space for that in those types of relationships. Look, it brings me immense joy to bring joy to my wife. Like I just love that. And it's the same thing. Like it brings Jill amazing amounts of joy to bring joy into my life. And one of the ways that she and I do this, the way we express love to each other, is by serving each other. We love to just do little things for each other based on the desires of the other person. Like, for instance, nobody in my family likes to change the cat litter box. They don't. They have a desire not to have to change the litter box. So do you know what I do? I don't like it either, but I do that for her. Like I go upstairs and I change the litter box a few times a week. I just do that because I just want to serve her and do things that she desires. She's the same way. Like on Sunday mornings when we're getting ready and we're getting set up and I go walk the dogs and I come back, you know what she does? She has a cup of coffee waiting on me. Most Sundays she has a cup of coffee waiting on me because she knows that I like to sit down, review my notes for the sermon, and just kind of be in this quiet space and to get my head right. And so she makes a cup of coffee and she has a cup of coffee for me waiting. But she's not doing it out of obligation. See, the reality is when I have a desire to have a cup of coffee in the mornings, when she has a desire not to have to change the litter box, when that desire becomes a demand, then your relationship becomes conditional. It becomes obligatory. And here's the thing about that. Like she'll look at me, if it's a demand, she's going to look at me and say, or I'll look at her and I'll say, hey, honey, where's my coffee? She's like, it's probably right next to the litter box that you forgot to change. That's what she's going to tell me. But it becomes an obligation. And here's the thing about a conditional relationship. You can no longer have an appreciation for that person when everything is based on an obligation and not a desire. When you have a condition-based relationship and you're doing things out of obligation, not out of love, you lose the appreciation for the other person. But if I can keep my desire in my desire box and not allow it to become some expectation that I am now living on the other person, then what I'm doing is I'm creating a space where we can demonstrate our love out of service. It's no longer an obligation. It's an act of love. It's an act of service that I have for her. And it's an act of love that she can demonstrate to me. See, in healthy relationships, people that love each other, they make it a priority to meet the needs of other people in their lives. It's just one of the things you do. Not because you have to, but because I love you, I get to. You see the difference? Like there's a difference there. You see the difference between a desire and a demand? See, here's the other issue with legitimate desires. One is that legitimate desires become demands. That's a problem. The second one is this: when our legitimate desires become misplaced. When we take all of our desires and we lump them on one person, like we now expect our spouse, our kids, our boss, our friends to meet all of our desires, that becomes a problem. Let me just give you a little bit of like marriage counseling 101. I do this with pretty much everybody I do premarital counseling with. You need to understand that your spouse will never meet all of your desires. It's just not going to happen. And let's say you get lucky enough and your spouse meets 80% of the desires, your wants, 80%. That's pretty good, right? What's going to happen is if you are in a conditions-based relationship, if you're the person who's putting that on the other person, you're going to become frustrated. You're going to become mad when they don't meet that other 20%. And oftentimes, they will go looking for that other 20% in other relationships. And if you were that person who the person is expecting you to meet all of their desires, here's what's going to happen. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be burnt out. You're going to be tired because you just can't do it. Like when we put the weight of our desires on someone else, our children, our spouse, our friends, ultimately they're going to fail you because they can't do it. And the reason is because they were never meant to do it. See, our desires, like our internal desires, whether they're legitimate desires or not, they're insatiable. It means they can never be satisfied. Like the thing I know about all of us today, nobody woke up this morning and said, you know what? I got enough love in my life. I don't need any more love. Like my love tank is full. I'm good. Like I've got enough peace. You know what? Give my peace to somebody else, God, because I've got enough peace. We don't do that. None of us do that because our desires are insatiable. And so we continue to go after those things. And what you need to understand this morning is that we are image bearers of an eternal God, which means He has written eternity on our hearts, which is why nobody can satisfy all your desires. Only God and God alone can meet all of your wants and needs because He is an eternal God and you have insatiable appetite, no matter what it is. And so He's going to keep going. He says this. He says, so you murder. Like the reason you have fights, the reason you have quarrels is because the desires are unmet. And then He says, so you murder. And you hear that and you're like, what's that about? Like, are you serious? That kind of escalated fast. Like, what he's talking about here, though, is that he's kind of re-emphasizing something that his brother Jesus talked about. Like, if you go back to Matthew chapter 5, you get the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about how serious our anger and how serious conflict is. And he says, this is what it's going to do for you on the inside. See, Jesus says it like this in Matthew 5, 21 and 22. He says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. And then Jesus does this. He says, but I say to everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to counsel. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. And look, I don't know about you. I don't even know what the hell of fire is, but it doesn't sound good. Like I'm comfortable with what the fire of hell is, but the hell of fire, that's a whole nother level. And he says, you will be liable to the hell of fire. So let me ask you this. Have you ever said something to someone worse than you fool? Have those words ever come out of your mouth? Have you ever degraded someone or said something out of anger and out of hatred so strong that was worse than saying, you fool? Because if you have, James is going to say, yeah, that's murder. Yeah, that's like murder in your heart. Like, that's what you're doing in this moment. Like for me, like when I rush into Food Lion because I'm in a hurry and I go to that 10 items or less express lane and I'm just standing there with my like 2 items and the person's in front of me and I'm looking at their bag and I'm like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, that's 12. I don't know what you're doing. That's 12. You know what that is? That's murder in my heart. Or like when I'm driving down the road on I-20 and I'm in the left lane and I'm just getting after it, and then all of a sudden all these people that want to drive the speed limit hop over in the left lane. All of them dead. They're dead because of the things that I'm thinking about them, the things that are developing in my mind about them. And that's what James is saying here. James is just kind of jumping on what Jesus says. He's exposing how destructive our selfish desires and conflict actually are in our lives. So then James is going to keep piling on. He's just going to pile on some more. He says, so you murder. And then he goes, you covet and cannot obtain. So you fight and quarrel. That word covet, sometimes some translations will say the word envy. And what it basically means is to lust after, to long for something with great, great desire. And what you got to understand is not everything that you covet in this world is a thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not a tangible thing. Like you can covet someone's beautiful home. You can covet their truck. You can covet, whatever. But not everything that you covet is a thing. Sometimes the things we covet is respect. Sometimes we covet status. We covet power. We covet all of these things. And what James is saying is like, look, there's a downward spiral that's happening here that's going to lead to quarrels and fights. And it begins with your passions. You have these inward passions that are at war with you, and they become these selfish desires. You have these desires inside of you. And if you don't meet these desires, if these desires are unmet and you leave them unchecked, what's going to happen is you're going to begin to covet. You're going to begin to like want these things more and more. Like you can't get them off your mind. Like it's just there on repeat all the time. Every time you see it, you're just thinking about it. And he says, when you do that, these things will lead to conflict in your life. That's where the fights come from. That's where the quarrels come from. And so regardless, he's saying, regardless if it's a selfish desire, regardless if it's a legitimate desire that you have turned into a demand that you've placed on someone, regardless if it's a misplaced or a misdirected desire, you are responsible for the way you respond. You and I are responsible for how we respond in the conflicts that we fight. That's why you have to pay attention to the things that come out of you. You need to use those things like a check engine light, because you're going to have some things that work themselves out in your lives. Ooh, I said some hurtful words. Ooh, that just kind of slipped out of my mouth. No, it didn't. You're a liar. It didn't slip out of your mouth, because that's what's on the inside. Those hurtful words were down deep, and they just kind of came out. And so James keeps going. He's going to offer us a solution, right? He's going to offer us a way. He says, you do not have because you do not ask. In other words, he's saying the solution is prayer. The solution is communicating with God. Like, rather than trying to manipulate people to get what you want, how about you just take it to God and you lay it at his feet? That's what he's saying here. You've got to communicate with God. And I ask that question and people are like, oh, of course I'm praying. Like, yeah, definitely I'm praying. Like, really? Are you? Maybe you are. Let me ask you this. Are you praying with the same intensity to God that you brought to that fight that you're fighting about? Because if you're not, then you're not doing it right. You're like maybe you're having a good old knockdown drag out. Like it's a good one. He said this, she said this, I believe, you always, you never, and it's just a good old fight, and you huff off and you slam the door. And then you remember, oh, wait a minute, Pastor Mike said I got to pray. Okay, dear God, will you be with my spouse? Amen. Really? That's how you're praying? Because I think when you do that, what God does is he looks at you like, really? That's what you're bringing? That's all you got? See, are you praying with the same intensity? That's the question you got to ask yourself. God, what do I do in this situation? I just want to honor you. I just want to glorify you in all things, but I don't know what to do. I have these desires to be loved. I have these desires to be respected. I have these desires for intimacy in my relationship. What do I do, God? I'm just going to lay it at your feet. See, that's what prayer is about. Prayer is about surrendering these things to God. It's about giving it up to him and allowing him to drive the train. That's why he tells us you got to take it to God. And look, don't be afraid to bring your struggles to God, and don't be afraid to be honest about them. Like, seriously, have you ever read the Psalms? Like David, he's got some pretty edgy prayers. He's got some pretty raw prayers in there. He's very genuine and very honest with God when he prays to God in those moments. And you read them, and sometimes we're like, ooh, I could never say that. I could never pray like that. Why not? I mean, David did, and he was a man after God's own heart. Do you think God doesn't already know what's in your heart anyway? Like when we pray, you understand God already knows what's in your heart. He's just waiting for you to catch up so you recognize it and acknowledge it in your own mind. You've got to be honest with God when you bring these things to prayer, when you bring your prayers to him. It's not like he doesn't know. And then he keeps going. Verse 3, James is going to say this. He says, you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly, to spend it on your passions. And you're asking yourself, wait a minute, Michael, are you saying there's a right way and a wrong way to pray? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because your motivations matter. It's not just about your content. When we pray, like sometimes our motives are off. Like our motives become self-centered. Our motives become, all about us. And our motives are not about God and bringing glory to him, but it's about personal gratification for ourselves. So he says, you've got to pay attention to why you're praying, the motive behind your prayer. He's saying the issue is not simply the content, but the motivation. See, God is not a vending machine for your desires. He's not a vending machine for your idolatry. And he is not going to feed you things that kind of support your own idolatry. He's not going to do that. And look, there is nothing wrong with bringing these things to God with a genuine and honest heart. You should. He wants you to. You should bring those things to God. But you got to understand, sometimes through the Holy Spirit, God's going to say yes to your desire. Sometimes the answer is yes. Other times, the Holy Spirit's going to look at you and be like, dude, are you serious? Like, no, we're not doing that. That's dumb. Like, we're not going that. Like, do you even hear yourself saying that? Like, there's no way we're going to do that. We're not even going to go there. So you got to understand, our Father is a good dad, and he gives us good gifts, but he is never going to give you into a desire that might drive a wedge between you and him. He's just not going to do it. So sometimes the answer is no to these questions. Sometimes it's not a dumb thing, right? But it's just you're not ready for it. Like you can't handle it if he gave it to you. Like I remember when I was younger, I was about that age, whatever that is, like 8 or 9 maybe, I don't know. But when I was about that age, I had a birthday, and I had just started karate, and I was super excited about it. So I asked my parents, I said, I want a samurai sword and some ninja throwing stars. That's what I want for my birthday. And you know what I got for my birthday? I got a Nerf gun. Because they knew that I was not ready to handle that. They knew that at that age, with that level of maturity, I was not ready for a samurai sword and throwing stars. So I had to wait a few years to get those things. But sometimes when we bring our desires to God, you got to understand, sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the answer is no. And other times the answer is not right now. You're just not ready for it. See, I think about Jesus when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, right before he was about to be arrested and falsely tried and crucified. He's in the garden, and he prays this very legit prayer. He has some very legitimate desires not to be crucified. He has some very legitimate desires not to be tortured and crucified and die on the cross, right? He says this, he says, Father, if there be any other way, let this cup pass from me. In other words, God, Father, if there's another way we can offer salvation, maybe we go with that. Like, man, it seems like an awful lot of waste of my blood if there's another possible solution. But he says, there's not. He said, will you let this cup pass? And 3 times in the garden, he prays this exact same request, his desire to let this cup pass from me. But ultimately, Jesus' heart is not my will, but yours. Not my will, Father, but your will. Like if this is the path, if this is the way, then yes, let's do this. That's what he's saying. So the question you have to ask yourself this morning is this. What is your posture? What is the posture of your heart when you pray? Like what's the motivation behind it? Are you looking for God's glory or for your own glory? Are you looking for you to be worshiped or for God to be worshiped? Do you want the praise or are you giving the praise to God? Are you surrendering that thing to God in the moment? That's what he's talking about here. And look, this whole thing is about peace. This whole idea of fights and quarrels and conflicts in our life, it's all about how do we obtain peace. That's what he's talking about. And here's the thing. If you want peace in your life, what James is basically saying is this. You got to stop trying to fight the people, and you got to just allow God to provide what only God can provide. Stop fighting with people for the things that they are never going to be able to provide you, and let God provide the things that you can provide. And essentially what he's saying, there's two things. Two things this morning, because I like to give you guys some handles to hold on to. There's two things that he's saying you got to do. The first one is this. You got to examine the battles within. That you have passions inside of you that are waging war in your heart right now. And you've got to do some self-check, some self-reflection. And you got to figure out what those passions are. And look, you got to be honest. You can't make up some excuses. You can't justify. You can't rationalize. You just got to be honest with yourself. What's waging war in your heart right now? What are the things that I want so badly, these desires, that I'm willing to sin to get them? You got to identify those things. And then the second thing you got to do is you got to take those things to God in prayer. You got to take those desires to God, whether it's legitimate desire that you've turned into a demand, or if it's a self-centered desire, but you got to take those things to God. You got to lay them at his feet. And when you do this, when you pray to God, what you got to do is you got to evaluate your motives. Why am I doing this? Is it for me, or is it for him? Is it so I get some credit, or is it so that God gets all the credit? Why am I doing this? Does it honor God? And then the thing that we've said throughout this whole series, you've got to surrender it to God. That's that whole idea of meekness. You've got to let go of it. You've got to surrender it to God. See, peace is not about getting your way. It's not. Peace is about trusting God's way. And that's what he's calling us to do this morning. You've got to trust God. And you've got to release those things to God. Because if not, those desires that are down in you are going to continue to wage war in you. And they're going to continue to manifest themselves in conflict, in fights, in quarrels in your life. Stop fighting with people and expecting them to do things for you that they were never meant to do. Turn to God in prayer and lean on him for the things that only he can do for you. All right? Let me pray for us this morning.